Those of you who are following along in the chat, I appreciate it. We've been adding some songs that we consider our happy songs, our happy track. So if people want to keep adding to that, maybe by the end we will compile those and share those out as well. Happy Wednesday. My name is Laura Stanton. I'm a family and consumer science educator for Ohio State University Extension, and I work down in Warren County, which is in the southwest corner of the state. I always tell everybody, you've heard me say this before possibly, but if you've been to Kings Island, then you've been to Warren County. That's where we are in the state, and we're really glad you joined us today. We appreciate you sharing your songs. I'm trying not to be distracted by looking at those, but I look forward to reading those later and keep adding them. If you want to put your name in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from, we always like hearing that as well, so feel free to do that. But I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Sherry.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Laura. It was great to see all those songs, and it just reminds me of the great music that is out there available to us. And sometimes I just turn on a tune and forget about all the woes of the day. So again, welcome. We are going to be meeting for about 25 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes. So it's not very long class today. And at the end, we'll have a short evaluation for you to fill out very quickly. So with that, we are going to get started with some of the workshop objectives. And if you'll forward the slide there, we've got three really simple objectives for today, and that is to become aware of what happiness is and a little about where it comes from. We're going to explore what happiness means to you, and then finally we want to leave you with some ways that you can start your own happiness journey. So those are just three of our thoughts in developing this class. A little about me. So I'm Sherry. I work for OSU Extension as well. I'm in Licking County, which is east of Columbus. And I'm a lover of learning. I am just fascinated by lots of things out there. It doesn't always have to be academic. It could be how to mix watercolors or something like that. I love nature, gardening, family, having fun, and love. There's a picture there of me in the garden. My camera kind of snapped that one, but I like that picture. And then one, a long time ago, I went on a color run with some colleagues, and we had a lot of fun there and got really dirty. But my life certainly has been filled with ups and downs, but you can't be a good sailor without some rough seas, right? So I began to look at some things that might make me more content and more happy. And so I learned to enjoy some of the little things. I have a raspberry bush that grows next to the air conditioner. Love looking at those berries every single day or almost every day. Trees, old books. And when I began to notice the little things that made me happy, I began to feel different, which led me on this journey of happiness and being able to see the brighter side of life. So that's a little about me. And as I was going through my journey, I thought, well, how do you define happy? This just seems like such an odd question, but is it? So can happiness really be defined? Do you think happiness is the same to you as it might be to someone else? And what's the point of it all anyway? Like, does it even make sense for our lives or make a difference? But in fact, happiness does. Has a pretty important role in our lives, and it can have a huge impact on the way we live our lives. Although researchers have yet to really pin the definition, and we've studied this a lot, there's so many definitions and philosophies. Although they have yet to pin a definition on one agreed framework for happiness, there's a lot that we've learned in the past few decades. Now, very basically, Webster defines happiness as a state of feeling or well-being of contentment. Other descriptions talk more about mental or emotional states of well-being, characterized by emotions that range from contentment to joy, sheer joy. Philosophers and religious thinkers define happiness in terms of living a good life, flourishing, the science of happiness. Here are some real life examples of people that have shared why they're happy. A woman who lives alone and has excellent relationships with her nieces and nephews, gives to charity, and finds meaning in her work. Another example would be a widow who enjoys regular visits with children and grandchildren, along with volunteering for local charities. So we know that happiness is defined by each one of us in a different way. And let's look a little further into the science of happiness. So that first slide, we sort of loosely defined happiness, a feeling or the state of well-being. But scientists see it a little different, and we thought we'd bring this in as well. So scientists see it as a combination of how satisfied you are with life and how good you feel on a day-to-day basis. Another study that looked at the science of happiness, or how people flourish, studied misconceptions. And these are pretty important and listed there in the slide, just a few. So for example, typically the happiest people are not the ones that have all the money in the world. Or do they feel peachy and hunky-dory every day? Or are they happiest when they reach their final destination or their goal? We know through studies that these are some misconceptions. Now, neuroscience has confirmed what Eastern and Western wisdom have now known. So Western neuroscience confirmed what Eastern wisdom has known. And that is what we can still learn, that happiness can be built on consistent practice. And we're going to get into some of these practices, but let me share one personal practice. One personal practice that I do on a regular basis is to find 3 good things in each day. It's a very simple practice. Some have gratitude journals and other things, but for me, it's just finding 3 good things in each day. It doesn't always happen at the end of the day. I tried to do that, like sit down and think. Sometimes it happens at a red light, or when I'm eating my lunch, where I just have a moment to slow down. Find 3 goods. Or when I've had a really bad day, sometimes I stop and I think about those 3 good things, and it begins to change my thoughts and how I feel about my environment and what was happening that day. Helps me to see the brighter side of life, which leads to greater contentment and happiness. So now I'm going to turn it over to Laura, now that we've sort of set that foundation, and she's going to share many more examples.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute and it wasn't letting me, so I apologize about that. Thanks, Sherry, for sharing all that information. And I just want to tell you a little bit more about myself. Like I said earlier, I'm the family and consumer science educator down in Warren County. And I've got a picture here of my family. I've been married to the point where I can't remember how many years now, which is a good thing, but I believe 27 is on the horizon. So I've been married for a long time. I have 2 teenagers. So when you talk about happiness, my life isn't always happy. There are days where, teenagers are good at making you not feel good about yourself or criticizing you. So just like Sherry said earlier, being happy and finding happiness doesn't necessarily just happen. You work on it. And so my kiddos make me super happy. But the reality of all families is that we have our highs and lows. We've had hard times, we've had rough patches, but at the end of the day, how we react to them has a huge impact on how we feel. And so I look at this picture of the four of us happy, smiling outside. And that is, for me, a huge source of my happiness. If you've ever done any other webinars with me, or you know me personally, you also know that nature is a humongous player in my life, and a big part of where I find joy and how I fill my bucket is just by being outside. And I also practice silence. And so for me, when I'm outside and quiet, that is where magic happens. And that is truly where I feel the happiness and I feel like I'm in the flow. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more as we go. I'm also a photographer. So the picture you see of the sunflower, the volunteer flower that showed up under one of my bird feeders. And I took this picture last summer. And I just still to this day could stare at this picture for long periods of time. If you look, there's like a natural mandala inside. Like I said, I didn't plant it. The birds planted it for me. And so I look at that. And when I'm out in nature, I often experience an emotion called awe, like where you're just like, wow, isn't life amazing? And there's actually science about awe now and how important that emotion is. But that idea that there's something bigger than ourselves out there. Some people drive to the ocean or they go to the mountains, and that's where they feel that sense of awe. But one of the things we'll talk about is finding that. And again, I didn't need a trip. I didn't need a plane ticket to see the sunflower. It's right in my own yard. So also, how do we find this awe right outside of ourselves? I'll also just share, there's a ton of quotes about happiness, but this is one that sticks with me. I'm sorry, I'm having problems like going back and forth between my keyboard and my PowerPoint slide. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. This is actually a sign we have in our family room, and it's a quote. It's attributed to John Lennon, but probably wasn't said by him. But he said, "When I was 5 years old, my mother told me that happiness was the key to life. When I went to school, they asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up, and I wrote down happy. They told me I didn't understand the assignment, and I told them they didn't understand life." Just keep that in mind as we talk. And like I said, it probably wasn't John Lennon who said that, but just the idea of being happy and what that means is really important to think about. So the next question I want to ask you is, what does happiness mean to you? And Sherry and I have shared what happiness means to ourselves, but what makes us happy is not going to be what makes you happy. And that's the whole thing. Like, that's the whole key, is you have to figure out what makes you happy. So in lieu of time in our short time together, I'm just going to pose these questions, and I would really encourage you to find time sometime in the next few days and ask yourself and really reflect on these questions. But what does happiness mean to you? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What makes you feel good? What brings you energy? When have you felt the happiest in your life? And who makes you feel happy? These are really just starter questions, but they're important. And one of the things that we have found research-wise, just in May of 2020, they did a poll of US adults. They've been doing this for years and years. And only 14% of United States adults say they're happy. Only 14%. That statistic makes me sad. That's why we're here. And I think it's really easy to get in that trap of not thinking about being happy or not doing things that make you happy. And so we're going to keep talking to you about that. But again, your answers to this are going to look different. And even if you do this once a year, they're going to look different, and that's okay. But take some time. One of the speakers I heard once just said, your life is like a remote control. Are you going to hand your remote control to other people, or are you going to be in charge of your own remote control? And happiness is very much like that. You're in charge. You have the remote. What are you going to do? So very quickly, I'm just going to share a very simplistic version of what is often called positive psychology. This is written by Martin Seligman, and he is called like the father of positive psychology. And he has a gazillion books and does all sorts of TED Talks. So to like narrow this down to one PowerPoint slide, I'm sure he would just not be very thrilled about that. But I just want to give you just a little bit of what he says is the recipe in terms of happiness. And so, like I said, gross simplification here, but he says the first thing you need is a pleasant life. So that means that you experience positive emotions. You look back on your past, you think about your present, as you look future, you have fond and positive memories. So that means you're living a pleasant life. A good life, he says, is when you are actually plugged in and using your own strengths and virtues. You can acknowledge them, you know what they are, and you're utilizing them in your work or your profession, well, your work or your personal life. And then the third dimension is a meaningful life. And he sees that, and this is based on research, as serving others. So connected to things that are larger to yourself. And then in conclusion, to have a full life, you would have all three of these. A pleasant life, a good life, a meaningful life will lead you to a full life. And now the question is, how do we make that happen? So Sherry's going to talk about that next.
There's that mute button again. Well, Laura and I really like this website called Action for Happiness. And these are 10 tips that we're going to share, or 10 keys for a happier living. And we're going to explain each one of them in a little detail, but it helps us think about our activities and our attitudes every day. Remember, we talked about day to day, being happy every day, and help us focus in on a little more tools. And as we share these, so there's 10 of them, I want to encourage you not to get overwhelmed. They're not meant to be done all 10 at the same time, but just maybe pick something that you sort of feel energy around, or that maybe gets you more excited, and begin to work on just one thing at a time, one activity at a time. So next slide. So I'm going to do the first 5 and Laura's going to do the second 5. The first one are external keys. And it stands for, this infographic is called The Great Dream. First 5 are external and the next 5 are internal. So giving, number 1, the first key, doing for others. I can't tell you the number of times that sort of unexpected things happened that I had and I call it an opportunity to do good. This Saturday, I was at the bank. I was kind of running late. It was the last 10 minutes of the bank. The bank was closed. There was a couple sitting next to me, and something happened with her card, and they couldn't get it unlocked. And I was sitting there, waiting and waiting and waiting my turn. And I couldn't help but hear. And when the teller told her that she was unable to unlock her card, the girl, she just bursted out in tears. It almost makes me cry. Bursted out in tears and said she couldn't go home. So that was my opportunity to give to others. And I happen to have a 20 sitting in my ashtray. And I got up and I slid it through their window, and she started crying again. Now, we never know really what they do with the money we give them or the gifts, but for me at that moment, that was an opportunity to give. And maybe it showed some love to her, or kindness, or I don't know what they would use that for, but she said she couldn't go home and she couldn't eat. And again, look for these opportunities that are available to you, because if we want to feel good, we need to do good. Sorry for the tears, but sometimes these sort of, I'm not saying it's less academic, but these more emotional lectures, they bring emotion, and that's okay. Relating, another great connection with people. Relationships are important. In fact, they're one of the most important contributors to happiness. If you look in European countries, families all live together until they're very, very old. And so think about the relationships that you have with your family and friends. Those ties are super important. And if you don't have a good friend that you can tell just anything to, begin to work on that. Begin to find someone that you can share with and have a relationship with. Exercising, we hear this all the time. Exercising, it is important to take care of the human body, because when we take care of the body, it takes care of the mind. But this doesn't necessarily mean that we have to go in a gym and pump iron, right? It just means that we need to take some steps to move. If you go home and you sit on a chair because you're tired after a day of work of sitting, try to begin to start some kind of exercise. Maybe you walk to your mailbox and back. You slow yourself down. You unplug during that little walk. Maybe it's just a walk around your home. It always helps me to meet a friend because I'm a little more accountable. They're waiting for me, right? So exercising, I can't tell you enough how important that is. And just being able to move. I'll go through this quickly. Awareness. This means, again, just slowing down, stopping and noticing the smell of your coffee, the puffy white clouds, instead of rushing by every day. And then trying out is the last one for the external keys. And that means keep learning new things. Our ways of learning don't always have to be academic. But they can be more simple. And like Laura talked about earlier, maybe it's an aha moment where you find that beautiful sunflower and you learn, I don't know, she talked about the center of it there. You learn more about it. But anyway, those are the 5 external, and I'm going to turn it over to Laura for the internal keys.
Great, Sherry, thank you. And I wrote in the chat, but I think your story is powerful and it's emotional because it 2 of those keys you were just talking about, the giving and the relating to others. So I appreciate you being vulnerable and being emotional. That's important. Like Sherry said, I'm going to talk about the internal things. So the first 5 keys were how you relate to the external world. And then the last 5 are just your own internal kind of focus. So the first one is direction. Having goals to look forward to, feeling good about the future. Super important, and something we can do. We can create our own goals, our own vision of what the future should look like. The key is just to make sure they're realistic. We can add stress by adding too many goals. So we don't want to do that, but just have things to look forward to. The next one is resilience. So finding ways to bounce back. Both Sherry and I have shared, we've had stories where you've had those rough seas, but you bounce back. You get back behind the wheel and you start sailing again. And we know from research, you can actually learn to be resilient. If that's not your natural kind of way you're wired, that's okay. You can learn how to be more resilient. You can learn how to choose to react in a more positive way. Emotions is just all about focusing on what's good, seeing what's good around you. We say often, seeing the glass half full rather than half empty. And again, we know people are actually wired. It's part of like our temperament, whether we're half full or half empty kind of people, that we can learn and work and coach about being more of the half full kind of personality. Acceptance is really important one, but this is feeling comfortable with who you are, warts and all, like, okay, like we all make mistakes and we give ourselves grace about those mistakes and we accept we're not perfect and we embrace who we are and what we look like and the silly things we do and the way we laugh and all those goofy things that we often are so hard on ourselves about. Don't worry about it. Like, accept it and find yourself, like, you're beautiful. All of us are beautiful in our own ways, and find ways to be comfortable with yourself, to know that you're comfortable in your own skin. And what we know from science is that if you feel better about yourself, you're also kinder to others. You're more accepting of others. So it's so important. And then finally, meaning. We've said this in many different ways, but this is really a part of being a part of something larger than yourself. And so whether it's giving to others, volunteering, serving, it could be our job where we feel like we're making a difference. It could be religious or spiritual beliefs, our family and friends, any way that we feel connected with something larger than ourselves. And like I said before, for me, and I've seen some things in the chat, and nature does that for so many people. But just one really quick thing I want to say about the meaning part and being connected. It's really, really important for youth and teens. They're living in worlds with this little rectangle that they carry around everywhere. They're taking selfies. They are by nature self-absorbed. And so making that shift from outside of their own teenage heads without that fully developed frontal lobe to something bigger is really an important thing that we can do. So Sherry and I would love to ask you to just make a plan. In the next 24 hours, this is kind of looking forward to something. What could you do to feel more happy or feel more connected to your happiness, increase your happiness, however you want to frame it, just before you log off today? Think about that so that you have a plan. And if you're willing to share it, we have our emails there. We would love to hear from you. No pressure, but we would love it. And then just because we're running out of time, we have 3 main resources we want to share with you. We want to say this at least once. This is science-based information. It might sound like hoogly moogly or, you know, new age, whatever you want to call it, but there's so much science behind this. So Berkeley in California has the Greater Good Science Center. In the UK, they have something called the Action for Happiness, which is who came up with those 10 keys, again, based on research. All of this information is in that link that Jenny just shared in the chat. There's also a free course from Yale called The Science of Wellbeing that you can take, and we highly recommend. So I'm going to finish talking really fast. I'm going to turn it over to Sherry. She'll tell you about evaluations, but we will both hang out afterwards. If anyone has any questions or comments, Sherry and I will stay here and we'll be happy to talk with you more. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, it's been a pleasure, and we do hope to hear from you. And it's exciting for us not only to share this information, but to help others. So this is a really quick evaluation. If you hold your phone up and scan the QR code, the evaluation will pop up. So if you would do that for us, we would really appreciate it. And while that's happening, are there any questions? Or is there something new that you learned today that interests you, that you might be able to start applying? Or maybe you already did. Maybe during this time you wrote someone a note, or you smelled your coffee, or something along those lines, as of maybe slowing down a little bit. I'm seeing some of the chats, but I'm on one screen, so you know there's lots of not lots of space, but
Sherry and Laura, it sounds like you need a code for your evaluation. Do you happen to have that?
It's going to take me a second. I should have shared that and I don't have it readily available. So give me a second. I will try to put that in the chat. If you have to go, we will also send out the link in an email tomorrow that will have the link to the evaluation. That's completely my bad. I messed up on that. So if you have to leave, feel free to do that. And like I said, we'll send out an email tomorrow that will have the notes, it will have the evaluation link and then the resources as well. So thank you. I was focusing on playing happy music and forgot to put the code in there, so I apologize. All right. If you need to go, feel free to log off. And then if you have any questions, feel free to unmute and feel you know, at ease asking your questions or putting them in chat. We'd be happy to respond. And thank you. Go out there and be happy.
Yes, thank you.